Hello and welcome to Counterpressed on The Ringer and Spotify. I'm in the studio with Gilly, Flaherty and Jessy Humphreys. On today's show, we talk about the Women's FA Cup fourth round as WSL and WSL2 sides entered the competition for the first time. But the biggest story of the weekend was not about what was happening on the pitch, but the TV broadcast situation of it. So we'll get into all of that, and Charlton Town making history, getting to the fifth round for the very first time. Jill, first show back. We missed you. How you doing? How's your Christmas? Feels weird to say that, but
Christmas was good. It was nice and chilled, which is what I needed. And then I had a bit of went back to school, and then you got that new school bug that everyone ends up getting when you go back, all the germs that fly around. So I had a bit of a difficult week last week, but I'm finally feeling not 100%, but I'm near enough there now.
Downside of working at a school.
Yeah,
there's
kids
always
don't wash their hands and cuddle you and everything.
They need to follow Liam Rosenius.
Wash hands advice.
Washing hands.
JPH, you had a busy football weekend, didn't you?
I did. I went to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on Saturday. I was meant to be at Chelsea, but trying to see if anyone got sacked was deemed more important, which was kind of entertaining game, not for Tottenham fans. And then I went to Crawley to watch Brighton Forest. I've gone to 7 football matches already this month. Crazy.
Very busy.
I'm on an insane trajectory for the year.
And did you see our very own gaffer, Kate Longhurst, in the dugout at Forest?
I did spot her. I spotted her at the end on the pitch. I didn't say hello because I couldn't be bothered to wait around. Sorry, Kate.
Wow, let's hope she's not offended about that.
Also, it was like the away fans were like kind of far. You know, sometimes you're like by the bench, so it's like easy to wait. And I was like, I just can't bother. So.
Oh, were you in the Forest away end?
I was in the Forest away end.
Ooh,
yes.
Good vibes.
Yeah.
The ultras.
It was good vibes. The funniest moment was a guy turned to me and went, "Do you live near Brockley?" And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, I live in Forest Hill." And then I realised I was wearing my Browns of Brockley coffee shop hat that he'd obviously recognised. But I was like, why does this guy know where I live?
Do you live in South East London?
I was like, ooh.
That's so funny. Good travel, good away sport? They travelled well?
I thought it was pretty decent. It was probably like 30, 40 people, which I thought for a mid-table WSL2 side. Generally quite quiet. I think there was 900 in total, which for Brighton's quite low.
Yeah.
But I think maybe we can chat a little bit about that, because I think it says a bit about kind of where the FA Cup is in people's imaginations right now.
When you say imaginations, it's quite funny, because you're like, ooh, what are people thinking about when it comes to the FA Cup?
Yeah, that's what I think we should talk about.
And sadly, on the cup sets, and we'll get into when we think there'll be some proper cup sets in the FA Cup, but on the cup set radar, my predictions really were huge mistakes.
I was giggling. Those FOTMOB notifications on the Charlton goals going in. Oh my God.
Last week, people would have realised I was really talking up the Swindon Cup set potential at Charlton, because rightly so, as we talked about in that episode, Charlton have been a little bit scammy in WSL2.
No, but they're scammy, but they were unbeaten at home for the entirety of last season, of the last calendar year.
They're 5 points clear at the top of WSL2. Not only did they beat Swindon, but they beat them 10-0. So apologies, Swindon Town, because the FLH jinx was serious. And then was Liverpool...
You have to apologise to London Bees as well.
Was it Liverpool the other game that I thought maybe?
I think so.
I didn't foresee that Liverpool would buy all of Sweden in the interim period.
Hey, put some respect on Martha Thomas's name.
And Denise O'Sullivan.
Them in for fun.
Denise O'Sullivan also scored on her debut, so we'll get into that later. But yeah, no cup set, sadly, and Forest, unfortunately, lost 2-0. I thought that had cup set potential, actually, on paper.
In terms of the way the game was played, I wouldn't have felt surprised if Forest had nicked it. I didn't think Brighton were very good at all. I thought Forest looked like the better coached team, but I just think you see the physical and technical difference between WSL and WSL2 and lower players. And I was chatting to my girlfriend about it, because I was like, why is it like the men's FA Cup you get so much more of this, in the women's FA Cup it doesn't happen? And I just think in men's football, the physical level at the lower leagues is like not necessarily on a par, because it's like often people talk about the Premier League, like the speed, the technical quality, but you get like, you go down the lower leagues and you get some like really big guys or whatever. So you know, like in the Macclesfield game against Palace, like they're winning their duels because they like can physically compete. Whereas I feel like watching Brighton Forest, at least, it was like the game was quite scrappy and Forest were able to make it scrappy, but it was like Brighton was still winning all of those duels. So it felt like that's kind of why those cup sets don't happen.
Well, I'm kind of with you in that actually the lower down you go in the men's football pyramid, the more physical you get often.
Yeah.
And it's the speed of play that is the real difference.
Yeah.
And it's the, like you say, the technical side, whereas in the women's game, it's not quite like that. I think so many players, when they come from abroad especially, they talk about the WSL as a very physical league. And I think that's where you see that gap. Okay, let's get into then the big topic of the weekend. Let's talk about TV broadcasting next. This was a topic that got lots of people frustrated, especially on Twitter, because for the first time this season, there is a specific broadcast deal for the Women's FA Cup. So Channel 4 and TNT are showing games, with TNT showing kind of the bulk of games across an FA Cup weekend. It's the first time we've really had a deal for the Women's FA Cup, because in the past, BBC have sort of picked up a few games in the latter rounds. So it does make a big difference. But the issue is that if TNT were broadcasting a game at a specific time and there was a game kicking off at that same time, those clubs could not broadcast the matches on their own club channels. So in the past, if a game hadn't been picked for TV, City or Chelsea or whoever would stream it themselves. So across the weekend, that meant that Chelsea, and this was the one I think Chelsea fans were probably the most vocal in their frustration, but City fans as well, they couldn't broadcast their game against Crystal Palace, although one fan did stream it on Twitter themselves.
I think there were a couple in the South Stand going for it, but yeah.
And I know one of the particular streams had over 2,000 views, so there was obviously appetite for it. And it got a lot of people talking because there was a lot of frustration. Obviously, there's kind of two contextual things around it, which is part of it is you want fans to try and go to games. So obviously, if Chelsea aren't on TV, there's more chance that Chelsea fans are going to go to the game to watch it. And I think where you were talking about where the FA Cup sits in people's minds, Jessy, I think often if you are a WSL fan and you know that your team's been drawn against a lower league side in the FA Cup, that's maybe a game you'd skip because you think, well, we're going to blow them apart, right? So there's the fan element, but then there's also the kind of the centralising of the audience, right? Which is, if there's a game on TV, TNT are going to want everyone to watch that game that is behind a paywall, or in the case of the Arsenal game, that was on both TNT and Channel 4. And they're not going to want someone to watch Chelsea for free on a stream where there's actually probably more of a general audience that's going to watch that game than Sunderland, London City Lionesses. So it has opened up this bit of conversation moving forward, and maybe it will influence the TV picks that we see in the fifth round, because I was surprised to see Sunderland, London City Lionesses as one of the chosen TV games. We had a game on Thursday night, which was a real little Thursday night treat, and a game on Friday night. I understand why they picked those, because you thought, oh, maybe potential upset, especially the Newcastle West Ham one. We also talked about that as a potential upset. Obviously, it wasn't the case. Both the WSL sides won really comfortably, but it was more the games on Saturday and Sunday that people were frustrated about, because they are the bigger clubs, they are the most popular clubs, and people couldn't watch them. Jill, I don't know, you obviously having played in the competition and now working on the media side, have experienced it on both angles there, but when you were first playing this competition, there really wasn't much coverage at all.
No, there wasn't. The only game, when I first started out, the only game that got streamed was the final. And the FA Cup final was the game really where I think I might have been about 13 and I'd just signed for Arsenal. And I remember it was the one game of the year that was on the telly for the women's game, and Arsenal were playing, and I don't know who they were playing, I can't remember. It probably was Charlton, because I think a lot back then it was Arsenal, Charlton all the time. But Judy Fleeting, they was talking on BBC about how Judy Fleeting had been flown down that morning. I think she scores a hat-trick in this game.
That's against Charlton.
And it was my first vivid memory of women's football. And then every year, it was as I was getting older, it was the FA Cups on the telly. And then there was a couple of times where then I went to watch Everton, I think it was in Charlton, Arsenal when they played Leeds at Millwall. Those were then before I then started to obviously then get involved with the Arsenal first team. But it was always, the FA Cup was always my favourite competition.
I was at Arsenal Leeds at Millwall. We could have met and become friends.
But that was one I was really gutted about not being involved in, because if that had been the year after, like, obviously I was a Millwall fan, so I was like, to go and see it. But that there, I mean, I think it was 5-0 that game. But it was just, that's the thing that everyone looked forward to. And I think even then, when as a player, when it went to Wembley, we always knew as a player, like they played at Nottingham Forest Ground a couple of times, you knew it was going to be that one game where you'd get 24,000 minimum. And everyone turned out for it. And obviously then when it went to Wembley then as players, you was like, oh, I wanted to play at Wembley. But it was always because it was that one game that was televised. So, yeah, I think it's especially for that young, the lower clubs, for them to come in and they always eye up playing one of the big WSL sides. From then, if it's a home game for them, for example, you'd want fans to be going, because obviously then it gives them revenue. But at the same time, you want exposure. You want those players to also be given the opportunity to be on the telly, and for people to go, oh, like, look how well they're doing, or for example Bournemouth, or to spot individual players too. So,
and I think we had that in the previous round, because obviously the bigger sides weren't involved, so they were always going to be picking non-league grounds or smaller sides, and you are going to get a bit more of those sort of, I guess, individual stories, or seeing individual talent, like Wolves, for example, always a team that have kind of really like stood out at those in those early rounds, and they already had, and Middlesbrough as well, they both had kind of games that were broadcast. And I'm with you, Jill, like my first memories of watching women's football on TV were always FA Cup final, always, and I remember so many of those ones at the City Ground as well. And there is an actual kind of TV legacy there, but it's always only ever been at those latter stages. So this is a kind of first rethink of that, but it's whether the game is almost ready for moving things behind that paywall. And it's the same conversation we've had in the WSL, right? Jessy, what's your thoughts on it?
I don't know whether this is a little bit anti-woke of me, but I kind of feel like, not that it's been spoiled, but I feel like there's become this expectation in the women's game that every game gets shown. Which I feel like, coming from men's football, I feel like I don't really expect to be able to see. And I know it's also different for international fans because, for example, there's not a 3:00 blackout. But like, I find it normal that I don't watch Chelsea men on TV, say, once a month or whatever, when those games are, you know, like this weekend, Chelsea were at 3. And, you know, even in the lower leagues, right, I know it's now, since COVID, basically become more common that there are more games shown. And obviously there was like a new Sky deal done. But like, you go to watch your team at home. And I do kind of feel like, to an extent, while I understand the frustration, I also think it's no bad thing to be trying to encourage people to go to games. You know, like, again, this is obviously a bit different for international fans because you're not going to be able to go. But like, Chelsea Palace is at Kingsmeadow. Like, you know, I've got almost more sympathy, say, for Man City fans because, like, Bournemouth is a really, really long way away. And, you know, it's interesting that the TNT picks were two really big distance games, right? They were two teams in the northeast against two London sides. I'm like, that's kind of good that those ones were picked and were shown. But I think for me, then the problem becomes that there's not become a standardised, and this is something we've talked about before, there's not then a standardised women's football time. Because when I talk about, say, the 3:00 blackout or like lower league men's attendance, the reason why that's, I think, more accepted is because everyone knows when your game is going to be. If it's not on television, it's on Saturday at 3:00. And even if you look at, you know, I guess I can sit here as a Chelsea fan, I work on Saturdays. The Chelsea game was on a Saturday. And normally, let's say the women's football time is like Sundays at 2. So if that had been at the normal time, I'd have been able to go. But because everything then gets moved around, I can't go. Okay, I know this is just like about me, but like I think, but do you get what I'm saying? Like if there was a thing saying Sunday at 2:00 is just always the standard women's time, and like all the FA Cup games that aren't going to be on TV, they're all going to be played at that time, and it's like what you're used to and what you know. I think that's like, I don't really think that has to be a bad thing, because I do think you want to encourage people to go to games. But I think there's just, you know, especially then with the WSL times, like stuff moves and stuff's at such stupid times that you then get into this habit of being like, well, yeah, I kind of want to watch everything on TV because last year loads of stuff was at 6:45 on a Sunday. This year loads of stuff's at 11:55 a.m. on Sunday. Do you know what I mean? I think that then it's created a culture where you expect to see everything on TV. So of course then everyone's like annoyed as a result. But I actually think the concept of it isn't really that bad a thing.
Couple of different things to follow up on. I agree with you in that you want to set the habits of going to games as much as possible and getting fans through the door, and also creating that energy around a competition, which is very popular culturally and very special. But I do think it's always felt like that hasn't come until later on, and not having cup sets doesn't help. I do think having a proper media rights deal and those broadcasters being able to lean into those storylines also does help create more energy and excitement around the competition, and that kind of goes hand in hand. But I agree with you, Jessy, in that there shouldn't always be an expectation of it coming for free. But I also think for the strength and growth of the competition, you need those bigger sides to uplift the lower sides, and therefore I think that does come through some kind of broadcast coverage. Obviously, Arsenal-Aston Villa is a WSL game we see all the time anyway, so for me, I'm not sure about that pick, but some of the other games I understand why you would have picked that. I think the big gap is having a highlight show that condenses all of it, because with Saturday 3pm stuff, you know that you've got EFL highlight show on ITV, or you've got Match of the Day, right, for the Premier League, which still is a very popular show. But we don't have a Women's FA Cup highlight show that threads everything. You've got individual highlights that are available on YouTube pretty soon after games, and then I believe you can watch the full matches as well the next day. So that's great. Digital access is great after the fact, but I do think, and this is, you know, expensive to make, and even the women's football show, you know, like it gets a very small amount of duration that it has. You need that show that can wrap it all together to again thread those storylines so that everyone feels like they know where to access an editorialized version of things, because that's why Match of the Day works. That's why EFL show works, even though it's been kind of butchered so much through the years. Is like, you want to know that you can go somewhere, it's easily digestible, it's kind of spoon-fed to you to get all those storylines in one place. It still feels a little bit kind of like bitty that you have to go on like individual Twitter pages or individual YouTube highlights in order to actually kind of know what happened over the course of a couple of days. And this is the first year of this media rights deal, so I think, you know, there are always going to be learnings, and the fact that the competition can even command a media rights fee, which will probably be very small. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's probably some kind of medium six-figure deal. That is very important still, and that shows growth. I just feel like you need to find that balance of leaning on the bigger sides while also kind of making sure you're platforming and not stealing fans away. Because it's not a 3pm issue where I don't think that fans won't go to Chelsea Palace or fans won't go to Bournemouth City because if Manchester United being the main pick or Arsenal the main pick. With the 3pm blackout in the men's game, you risk stealing fans who maybe are Stockport County fans who won't go because the Manchester Derby's on TV at 3, for example. That for me is the biggest risk. But I don't think you have that in the women's game, so it's just about finding that balance. And the second point, Jessy, I completely agree with you, and I think we are going to hopefully see a solution to this by the end of the season, but not having what feels like the best, most comfortable set women's football kickoff time has left things in a bit of a confusion and a bit of a mess where you do expect to get access to everything, and you don't always have a sense of routine and habit. There was a previous time where you knew that it was probably going to be Sundays at 2 p.m. We've moved away from that. There is this in the WSL, back and forth about best TV time versus best fans time. I'm not sure anymore whether 2 p.m. on a Sunday is going to make much difference than 12 p.m. from a fan attendance point of view. And then from a TV point of view, you're going up against, whatever the Premier League Super Sunday one is. But again, 6:45, it was great for TV, but obviously fans didn't like it. So it's really hard to find what feels like the best time, which used to be that 2 p.m. on Sunday, but it's whether women's football has kind of outgrown that Sunday slot, because also the 2 p.m. on a Sunday one used to be a big issue because Chelsea women would always clash with Chelsea men, who were inevitably on a Super Sunday. Now Chelsea men have kind of fallen off a little bit. They're less on a Super Sunday than the previous used to be, but Arsenal clash more. But it's whether you feel like those WSL sides have crafted enough of their own strong individual fandom that doesn't matter clashing with any men's team.
For me, the clashing thing is annoying, but I think, again, you just have to accept that's the reality of football schedules. There's so many different stakeholders involved. I think it's good if it's under consideration occasionally, but I think, again, sometimes you've just got to accept that your teams are going to clash. That I just think that's part of the reality. I was just thinking about it, being at Brighton as well, and again, 900 isn't a bad attendance at all. But you'll see them get 3,000 for when United or Arsenal or Chelsea go along, and I get that it's a bigger game, and that's also true in men's football. Teams that don't sell out every week, you'll get bigger attendances for bigger games. Of course you will. But I don't know, it just had me also thinking about how much women's football leans into the spectacle and those big name players, and I understand why that's been a really good marketing thing over the years, and you kind of see it in this sort of happy clappy, we should all support everyone within women's football, blah blah blah, that sometimes comes out from people running the game, as opposed to I guess the more tribal thing, which is you go and watch your team at home every week or every other week. And I just feel this whole issue, or some of this issue, feels like it stems from that feeling of I don't know, just that maybe this push on attendance, there's not enough thought about fans, and I get that it's hard because as you say, the TV money is important, but it kind of becomes this, I
guess my argument would be is that this, now speaking of unwoke, this is unwoke.
Let's hear it. Let's get into it.
My argument would be is that the fans have been more prioritised this season in terms of a time that suits to get bums on seats, because 6:45 was horrible.
Yeah. And
outside of the Thursday and Friday night games, all of the Women's FA Cup games kicked off at a pretty convenient time.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I guess that's.
So I think fans were prioritised and have been prioritised, but they also have to play their part by turning up.
No, but I guess
that's my unwoke comment.
This is, I guess, a little bit. The Brighton thing is maybe a little bit different. I feel like I've kind of confused my arguments, but that's my point in terms of people complaining about the TV. Is you kind of can't, and it's maybe just different segments of people, but you kind of can't have your cake and eat it. That I agree that with the exception of the Thursday and Friday night games, which were televised, everything was very attendable, and that's maybe the balance that you have to have, is your game isn't on television if you can go to it reasonably. So therefore I'm the broadcast thing feels a bit of a silly thing to get upset about, because as you say, then you get into the thing of and you saw it with the men's FA Cup, because TNT showed way more games, but they were just spread out in this totally ridiculous way, and obviously it was a fun third round because there was upsets and people enjoyed all of that, but I felt across that weekend you lost some of the fun of Saturday 3:00, everything goes. You know, like that's like, to me, that is like what the FA Cup feels like it should be about, and about going to like a local game or a random game or whatever. And that's why I guess I find it interesting that in women's football, it's felt like there's this real expectation that everything should be on television, which just feels very different to, I guess, general ideas of English football. And I know what people will immediately back with is that it's about visibility, and like, we have to have women's football everywhere so people watch it, da da da. And I'm just like, well, maybe we don't.
Turn off the cameras.
I don't, you know, there was what, 1, 2, 3, 4 games, right? There was a Thursday night, a Friday night, a Saturday lunchtime, and a Sunday afternoon game shown on television. That seems like,
well, it's more
fine to me.
It's more than they've ever really had before on the fourth round. No, I think there's lots of valid points there. I just think it's that fine balance between getting people through the door, which I do think there is an incentivised thing there, but also the FA Cup is still at this early, weirdly, like, even though it's such a historical competition, it's almost like the interest in it takes so long to build until later on, where Wembley does insane numbers now every year for it, and people buy their tickets way in advance before they even know who's going to be in the final. And then lower down, it's actually about those second, third and fourth tier sides, what attendance they can get. And that's where the priority should be. But you can only get that if you find and elevate those storylines, and you get the draw in which you have big team versus small team, and that becomes its own thing. But be interesting to see what happens with the next round. I know lots of people had big opinions on it. That's all the TV chat. We'll park that there. It's not going to be the last we talk about TV in the women's game this season. That is for sure. There's actually a big piece, plug, on the cutback about WSL TV broadcast situation. So do have a read of that. But that's enough of that. Let's talk about some of the games next. So let's start with Charlton Town. Jill, we were there early this season doing the draw. Head coach, a guy you know really well, in Keith Bonus. They beat York City 3-0. The only fourth tier side still left in the competition. The first time they've ever got through to the fifth round. So the real kind of fairy tale story still left in it. And it is really nice to see them have this progress. And for that club as well, we saw when we were there how much they've invested. Amazing stadium, like huge screen, amazing grassroots setup as well. But for them, this is massive to get to the fifth round, and they'll be hoping that they're going to get a big side in the draw as well.
Yeah, it's one of them ones though where I think they'd be hoping for that, but I also think if they was to not get such a top WSL side, I feel like it's one of them ones anyway. You want either to face a top WSL side and know that the chance of you being knocked out are pretty high, and you're going to use that as the occasion and sort of the day, the FA Cup, or could there potentially be one more roll of the dice really, where we could get a lower team and potentially go through again? It will obviously be really difficult for them. But yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of time for Keith, known him since I was a youngster, and we went down there. There was a couple of players that I know from when I was coaching at Millwall, and their goalie Simone, I actually signed her when I was the manager of Mill under 11s. She was my goalie then.
Wow, you recruited her.
So yeah, I knew she was going to be one for the future. But I signed her when she in the under 11s. So that then I was like, oh, it's actually making me feel really old. But they've got a good group down there, and like we said, off the pitch as well, the investment that they've got, the facilities. And I know with Keith, I think Keith's one of the guys as well who I feel he's done so much for the women's game, but it's sort of a little bit lost, and he's a little bit forgotten about, considering where he was at. And I think for him, he's one of the people who, even talking to him that night when we done the draw, he don't want pats on the back. He don't want credit for what he's doing. And yeah, I feel he he doesn't get it. He don't get the recognition that he deserves. So I think for him as a manager and what he's done for the women's game, to obviously Chatham to be progressing, it's huge for them. And I'm keeping everything crossed that they get a really good draw. Either way, a good draw that they potentially could get through, or a big club, so that they then get that chance to have the occasion as well.
Yeah, they got a nice draw in this round because they got York City, also fourth tier side, so probably one of the best draws you could get in terms of trying to progress. Jessy, I know you spoke to him in the build up to the game. What was he saying ahead of this one?
Yeah, it was good to chat to him. I guess for like context for people who don't know, Keith was at Charlton when Charlton were good, so sort of 2002 to 2007, and left when they disbanded the women's team when the men's team got relegated. But it was just funny, we was talking about, like the impact of what winning could have on the money for the club. So I think it was £54,000 if you win in the fourth round. And he was saying when Charlton beat Everton to win the FA Cup, so he went to 4 FA Cup finals with Charlton and won one. They got £5,000, which just shows you, like, I know we talk a lot about prize money and stuff, but it is sort of crazy when you think, it's not, that's like 20 years ago, it's not mental amounts of time. And yeah, like, how much winning would be a massive boost to their budgets over the next like 2 or 3 years. Like, that's the impact that these FA Cup results can have on teams like that. And obviously to a side like Chelsea, that money like is almost meaningless. Like, I know the Deloitte money report was out today, and this sort of like, Chelsea and Arsenal sort of have huge amounts of income coming in, I think it was showing, and so that kind of thing feels a drop in the ocean. But for a team like Charlton Town, that's obviously a really big deal. And they've had a great run. They've beaten Wimbledon and Exeter City to get to this point, both on penalties, both teams who are a level above them in the third tier. So I think to get the opportunity against York, I know Keith was disappointed that didn't get picked for telly. And I think that is interesting when we're talking about the telly stuff, that, maybe that game should have been picked because, one, it's more money, it is more eyeballs on teams that don't necessarily get seen very often, and also, more interesting because it's teams at a similar level. So I know actually in the end they were 3-0 up by half time and obviously won 3-0, so maybe it wouldn't have been as good a spectacle, but I think at least you're getting the sort of like even kind of showing there. But yeah, and it was also their first game at home in the FA Cup this season, so nice for them to get the opportunity to play in front of their fans and get a win. And yeah, hopefully, I guess, a big draw in the next round. I saw one of their players was saying that she's a massive Chelsea fan, so I was really hoping for Chelsea. But yeah, a big team at home, I'm sure, would be right up their street.
Yeah, I mean, when we did the draw, the bar at the ground was absolutely packed, because I think it's funny when we've been going to a lot of these stadiums as part of the draw, and you never quite know how many people are going to turn up. But Chatham's had the biggest turnout by far, and they had sessions going on the, because they've got like obviously one of those all season pitches that a lot of the community can use, and it was like they had a session going on that night, loads of kids, loads of parents, and I think there's so much coverage around the gap between the men's and women's FA Cup prize money, which is important to highlight, and it's still a huge gap. But the recent increases do provide the sort of income that can be seriously huge for some of these 4th, 3rd ranked sides. It's massive money for them.
The other thing like that I was speaking about with Keith as well was he was sort of talking about, like the owners backed the women's team, and like unlike some places, there was obviously a lot of chat about Bournemouth, for example, choosing not to put their game, even though it was at City, in the main stadium, and kind of what that says about where the clubs see their women's team and whether they're willing to like maybe pay a little bit more to open that up, but like to have a really big spectacle out of it. He was saying that the owner there has like really chosen to back the women's side and put money in, and you're not necessarily seeing the same like revenue returns, but then something like this is sort of the proof that what you're doing is worth it. They've beaten teams who are above them, and they've progressed, and then they're getting the money in as a result of the prize money. And I think that it's also that, right? Like it sustains your budgets, but it's also a sign to the ownership that there is, if you put stuff in, you can get prize money out. There are other ways to make money than just like through the turnstiles or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's an important carrot as well for a lot of these lower ranked sides, is that they can feel like they can make back their whole budget for the season in a couple of games. One of the other things, I was hoping I might get a York City double header, but obviously this game was away because I was watching York City men on the Saturday. But there was a nice halftime shout out for the York City women's team. They did acknowledge the fact that they were having to travel quite far away from York for this game, so I did feel quite gutted for them. But I'm very happy for Charlton Town, and I will be doing the draw again tonight. I won't be picking the balls out, so I can't take any criticism or positivity or credit for any of the potential draws that might come out. Jessy, you mentioned Bournemouth City. Funny thing that lots of people on Twitter were pointing out to us was that Viv Miedemar didn't take part in the warm-up for this game, but still came on and scored 2 goals. They won 6-0, I think, in the end. And yeah, it was kind of textbook Viv Miedemar behaviour, sort of like looking a bit grumpy. And, you would have thought, oh, is she injured? Is she not going to participate? No, she just did take part in the warm-up and then scored 2 goals anyway. So, yeah, she's a funny character.
I mean, fair play to her. I do think I could whip up some Twitter discourse about it being terribly disrespectful. But
well, at first I was thinking, I was on the kind of before she then came on and scored 2 goals, I thought, oh, is something funny going on here? But yeah, I imagine maybe there was a niggle or something that meant maybe she couldn't, but...
and then she saw how easy it was.
Yeah, and then she saw how easy the level was.
You could say, well, what's more disrespectful, that or when Mackenzie Arnold played at pitch in the FA Cup for West Ham?
That was iconic. No.
I forgot about
and then
that.
I think she actually done like a spin on the ball as well, a turn on the ball.
That is FA Cup history, though. That was
wow,
one of my
I forgot about that.
ever.
And it was everyone was like jumping on it afterwards, like that's so disrespectful. And it was like, the reason that she come out and play was because she needed minutes because she'd come back from her knee injury, and it was like, all right, they played her in the midfield or whatever, but
well,
no, that is, I think, more disrespectful.
Hopefully, it might be put to Audrey Eglerts ahead of this week's League Cup semi-finals as to what went down there. Other things to talk about, Erin has asked on Instagram thoughts on Liverpool's transfer business, because it's been a very busy transfer window and it's not over yet. Martha Thomas on loan from Spurs scored 2 against London Bees. Denise O'Sullivan from North Carolina Courage also scored against London Bees. Not a transfer, but very nice story actually for Liverpool. Maisie Truman became the youngest ever player to play for the club at 16 on the weekend, but they've also got Anna Josendal from Hammarby, Norwegian forward. Alice Bergstrom, Swedish fullback from Häcken. She also scored 2. A few injury issues still with players to come back. Beate Olsen and Leanne Kiernan are not back yet. But some serious business, Liverpool, from Jill. And we've been pretty critical of them. I do think, they're in this position at the moment in the WSL table because they haven't invested in and backed this squad. But you do look at this window and it looks like the sort of investment where they're trying to get the club out of this position and make sure that they're not the ones in that playoff place.
Yeah, and I think it's obviously Liverpool, we know, have had a very difficult start to the season for things on and off the pitch, and obviously with the change in that. And I think every weekend I feel like when I do go on Twitter and that, it's like, how long Gareth Taylor got, like how long has he got left? And I feel like that's always the thing that I always see on there. But I always do think it's hard for a manager to come from somewhere like City to come to the club like Liverpool, and you want to play a certain way, and you've got players there that might not necessarily fit that style of play or be good enough, in my opinion, to play like that. So I think giving him obviously this window now, and again I think your hands are tied a little bit as well with players that you can bring in during the January transfer window, because obviously with players' contracts and where they're at. I was surprised really with the Martha Thomas one though, because obviously I know Liverpool got quite a few injuries, and obviously especially with the goal scoring side of things, it's not really been happening for Liverpool. So for me Liverpool to go and sign Martha, it's no disrespect, but she's not a player who's coming in on fine form with figures flying through the roof. But I also do think her being at Tottenham and that constant battle, I think, and struggle with the whole with Beth England, who's that player who's going to be that 9, and sort of Martha Suits being the player that's sort of the main character as such in regards to the front line and having that opportunity. But obviously she got a goal as well, so it's started right for her. I just don't know how much of a, if they're reliant on goals, how much of a huge impact she's going to have with that. But I do think they needed to strengthen massively. And for them, obviously, they need to pull away from the bottom and get up as high as they can.
I imagine with so many of their injuries issues as well, someone like Martha Thomas is more a kind of squad cover with the other players they've got, especially with also coming back from injury and with Josendal also being added, that you feel like Thomas can be one of a couple of options rather than having to rely on her for goals. Jessy, it's also night and day for West Ham's transfer activity compared with Liverpool's transfer activity, because we're seeing Liverpool spend some money, get some, recognisable, experienced, as well as up-and-coming, exciting, Scandi talent, and then you've got basically a West Ham exodus and them signing a bunch of kids.
Yeah, I mean, definitely with Liverpool, you do get the feeling that they've got a nice spread in terms of players coming into the league for the first time, but also, like you say, Thomas is someone who knows the league very well. Denise O'Sullivan's played here before. The Denise O'Sullivan fee is a little bit crazy, I think, especially because we know that Liverpool don't really have a big budget.
For a player of her age as well, I think.
But I've always really liked her, so I'm kind of like, well, I mean, you may as well roll the dice on it. Whereas West Ham, and what's interesting, I guess, is, West Ham have also brought they've just brought a new manager in. It feels like you kind of think you should be backing her. Whether they want to get her through the door and they're like assessing right now and they're going to go crazy in the last couple of weeks of the transfer window. You're smiling at me because you think that won't happen. I mean, I agree. I don't think it will happen, but I'm just giving the West Ham the benefit of the doubt at the moment. I don't know. My cynical opinion is that West Ham have probably been trying to go down for years and years at this point, but
well, I think there is meant to be some investment coming, but until that is confirmed, and
maybe that's the issue as well. If they're waiting, to fully sign off around investment, but then again, it's like, well, if you're the club doing this, like, but equally we've seen, Liverpool are an example of this. Birmingham are also a kind of good example of this. They broke the WSL2 transfer record this week. Teams that have gone down and then, investment has come in, or they've got their act together and they come back up again. So maybe if there is something coming in for West Ham, it might also be fine for this year, because, they, in the game against Newcastle, they didn't look amazing. It was quite even-handed for like the first half hour, but they still went on to win 3-0, which again, when we are thinking about that bottom of the WSL club playing against the third place WSL2 club, does feel like those WSL clubs, especially when you look at these FA Cup results, that they're probably going to have the upper hand there.
Jill, Kim Little scoring in Arsenal's 2-0 win over Aston Villa. They were talking to her afterwards on Channel 4 or TNT, I can't remember which one it was, saying that she's now scored in 15 seasons for Arsenal, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And we've spoken a lot about Arsenal's ageing squad and who's going to be moved on, who isn't. She got a new contract last season. She was really instrumental in their Champions League win. And she is still a really core player for them. And she had a brilliant game yesterday. But it's an unbelievable record to say that you've scored in that many seasons for Arsenal. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, Kim, I think she's consistency. That's what she is. And I think, yes, she's getting older. The way Arsenal are playing as well is changing. But she's still someone who, can create something. And obviously she gets the assist yesterday as well as the goal. And she's just always been a player. I think even when I was at Arsenal, she was always a player that she always wanted the ball. She was, especially as if you're ball playing from the defence. You want a midfielder. G was really good here at Chelsea. You want a midfielder that's going to always show for it, and sometimes that isn't always a positive because I know she can get caught on it. But I also think Kim's got that experience where she's able to drive the team forward. And in a game where Arsenal had lots of chances and couldn't, or struggling to finish, it takes Kim to be able to sort of step it up a gear, and for her to be able to do what she's done at the level consistently over the years as well. She's a huge part of Arsenal.
Pocket Hannah has asked, what would need to change for us to see a cup set more often in the women's game? What do you think, Jill?
I just think it's hard. I think because, like Jessy was saying, when you talk about with the men's FA Cup and you see the higher teams get drawn against the lower teams, 9 times out of 10 it's an upset. Whereas I think because we're talking whether it be about the physicality or anything like that, but I feel like there's such a gulf in the women's game of, realistically, right, if you're seeing Charlton Town come up against Chelsea, it's going to have to take something. And sometimes it would be, I mean, I was part of the Chelsea team when we lost to London Bees, which still haunts me to this day. But that was as well, we went to London Bees pitch, which wasn't the best. And it was things like that, whereas I feel like the women's game it's improving for the better. So those issues of pitch aren't necessarily there anymore, but it's sort of, you don't see it. You could really, the top teams could really play their youngsters and they would probably still get a result because of the gulf is so big.
And also the men's football pyramid and the size of it is so much bigger than the women's football pyramid. So you've got guys who were very good academy players across all divisions, whether that's Premier League to League Two, who then are dropping down and playing in for non-league, who are still an unbelievable ability, as well as the stories of the guy who's a PE teacher or the guy who's a bricklayer, and like that's still the case, but a lot of them are sort of like high-level academy guys who couldn't break through at 16 or 18 or whatever, and they've still played at a very high level building up to that. And the women's football pyramid is so much smaller, and the further you go down, the quality of kind of coaching and training and access, it just differs so much. Like the gap is so big that I do think it's almost like we need years and years of more development to see that. And it's not obviously just the prize money that feeds into that, but it's also what the explosion of the grassroots game post 2022. We'll probably see the cup sets as a result of that explosion in 10-15 years, because there'll be so many more grassroots players, so much more development pathways, etc., that all feed into this bigger and better women's football pyramid. But we're still so early on in that journey. The cup sets, like you say, Jill, they require so much more luck and madness and, a team missing 40 shots on goal, as opposed to you being able to say, okay, we're going to play this certain way against them, because it's so much harder to do.
Yeah, and I think, also if you think how far down the men's pyramid is professionalised, your professional fifth-tier teams, the WSL2 has only just gone fully professional. And I know lots of teams within that were already professional, so, it's not like a totally big change. And, you do have professional teams or teams with some professional players in the third and fourth tier, but it's very, very different. I think to, just like what we're talking about, the physical capacity, if you're able to be using the gym, if you're training, 5 times a week, versus if you're having to sort of balance that with other stuff. And then I agree, I think, and again, I think we are starting to see this with WSL too, more players who've, come from elite academies who aren't making it at WSL level, moving into WSL2 teams. I think that will only continue as, especially elite teams put more and more money into their academies, in the same way that's happened in the men's game, because you're so desperate to, find the gems, and you also start to see that this is a way to make money, like that clubs will sell their players who aren't going to make it for them. So I think it will come. It's just time, like you're saying.
Yeah, and when you look at, because I was at a men's National League game on the weekend, when you look at the National League table, it is so competitive there because you've got lots of long-established Football League teams that have dropped down that are now competing with historic non-league teams. It's crazy. Like, you like Carlisle, Scunthorpe, Forest Green Rovers, who were not long ago in the Football League, Yeovil, who've been stuck down there for a while now, like Morecambe. That's a lot of big EFL sides that have dropped down who are now competing with Truro, for example.
Also, you know, I think it's something that does get talked about a lot, and I think is something that's really, really cool about football within this country. Attendances at that level are like globally unparalleled. It's incredible, like the numbers that these clubs get out. And again, I think this is why, you know, it's attendance is so important in some ways to be considering in the women's game, because if you can guarantee a gate of 2,000 every fortnight, that gives you a really good base to like build a budget and have an idea of that. And it's so much harder if you are, say, you know, we're talking about how much the FA Cup prize money can change stuff for these teams, but you can't rely on that. You can't go into a season saying, fingers crossed we get 50k if we win in the fourth round. But, you know, if you can say, oh, we think we're going to get this number of people through the gate every fortnight across the season, that really gives you a good base. And I think that's something that the National League, despite the fact there are clubs that are also struggling financially, I'm not saying it's like this rosy financial picture, but I think it is something really unique to English men's football.
There were 8,000 people at York City watching York City Southend.
Like, that is mental.
And just over 700 Southend fans had travelled from the Essex coast.
Yeah, and I mean, Southend are obviously a team with you know, an incredible history as well. And like that speaks to your
so
point.
I do, for me, I mean, to not get bogged down in the attendance conversation, but I think so much of where women's football is maybe missed in the attendance conversation is about making those communities more important and sustainable, because that's how the National League has thrived, is community clubs digging in, sometimes getting the runoff from fans who are a bit disillusioned with the Premier League and want something that feels more accessible, feels like money hasn't kind of spoiled it, with, you know, an owner who has a local story or something. I think women's football has kind of missed that connection by sort of doing a bit of a like Premier League light in the big names, the establishment, and the owners obviously being the same as those Premier League owners. I do think, and I've spoken about this before, and how I think the EFL is a good blueprint as well for the WSL to look at, because EFL attendances are also, you know, doing really well. I just think that attendance conversation has really, like, you know, we've seen the numbers drop now. That attendance conversation needs to be focused on, and not just in the context of kickoff times and TV slots, because that's really important, because I do think once you get the TV right, I think everything else will come. But it's actually how you engage communities to come along because they want to be there and it means something, not just because a Lioness is playing. And I think that's been massively missed. But that's a whole podcast in itself. We'll wrap it there. A draw is going to be, fifth round draw is going to be at 7 p.m. tonight on YouTube. I'll be there with Rosie Committer, with Farah. What's everyone else up to this week?
What am I up to? I'm not going to any of the League Cup. I will say, having defended TV for the FA Cup, both the League Cup semi-finals being on at the same time. I mean, I don't know if it's not really a broadcast choice. I don't know what the hell's going on. WSL, why have you put these two games on at the same time? That is idiotic in terms of maximising people watching them.
Traditionally, it used to be one night after the other.
You've got the big four playing each other. Everyone would watch both those games, and instead everyone's having to choose between the two. That seems silly. And I've got book club. So
I actually think it's a you problem.
It's a me problem.
Cancel your book club, Jessy.
I
this
mean,
is more important than books.
Well,
I
won't be able to watch both games anyway. Yeah, so that's that. And then what am I doing this weekend? Oh, it's Chelsea Arsenal. Oh God.
Chelsea Arsenal. Well, we're going to be back. Jill, I think you're doing a bit of League Cup action as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
We're going to be back on Thursday talking about those League Cup semi-finals, of course, that are happening on Wednesday night. And then it's a big one this weekend. It's a big one in the WSL. It's Chelsea Arsenal, so we'll be talking about that on next Monday's show. But we'll leave it there. See you on Thursday.